My mother wants me, my siblings, to forgive our manipulative golden child older brother for stealing our younger brother's fiancée, and then, I never thought I'd see the day when my family could unravel like this. If someone had told me a year ago that my older brother Caleb would do something so unforgivable, I'd have laughed. Caleb has always been the golden child, the one who did everything right, or at least, that's what my mom has always made us believe. But now, sitting here in my apartment, replaying the nightmare that happened just weeks ago, I can't stop thinking, how did we get here? It started with Logan's wedding, or what was supposed to be Logan's wedding. My younger brother, Logan, is the most genuine person I know. He's quiet, thoughtful, the kind of guy who'd give you his last dollar without a second thought. When he got engaged to Avery, we were all thrilled. Avery was smart, funny, and seemed to love Logan just as much as he loved her. They were perfect together. One of those couples you see and just know they're going to last. And then Caleb happened. The details are still murky, even now. One week, Logan and Avery were picking out flowers and finalizing the guest list. The next week, Avery was calling off the wedding. I remember that day so clearly because Logan showed up at my door completely broken. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. He told me Avery had ended things. She wouldn't explain why, just said she couldn't go through with it. At first, I thought maybe it was cold feet. It happens, right? Weddings are stressful. But then the truth came out. Not even 3 days later, Caleb, the same Caleb who was supposed to be Logan's best man, showed up at a family barbecue with Avery. My mom, Linda, had invited us all over for family time. I hadn't seen Logan since he showed up crying at my door, and I was hoping to check on him. I'll never forget the moment Caleb strolled into the backyard with Avery, holding his hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. The entire yard went silent, like someone had hit pause on real life. I looked at Caleb, then at Avery, trying to process what I was seeing. What the hell is this? I asked, louder than I meant to. Caleb, the king of smug grins, shrugged like it was no big deal. Avery and I are together now. Logan wasn't there, thank God. But my sister Riley, who'd been pouring lemonade, dropped the pitcher. Glass shattered on the patio. My mom looked at Caleb with an expression I couldn't read, but it wasn't shock. That was the first red flag for me. Linda knew. Somehow, she knew this was happening, and she hadn't warned anyone. You're joking, I said, my voice shaking. I was hoping this was some sick prank, but Avery wouldn't look at me. She kept her gaze fixed on the grass, her face flushed with guilt. Caleb gave me his calm-down look, something I've hated since we were kids. It's complicated, Mason, he said, his tone maddeningly casual. But this is what's best for everyone. For everyone? I snapped. What about Logan? What about the fact you just stole your brother's fiancée? Avery flinched at the word stole, but Caleb didn't miss a beat. Things didn't work out between her and Logan. We didn't plan this, but I didn't let him finish. I stormed off, too angry to even look at him. Riley followed me into the kitchen. She was shaking as she whispered, "Did you see Mom? She didn't even say anything. It's like she's okay with this." That was the second red flag. Linda had always had a soft spot for Caleb. He was the oldest, the one who made the family proud with his college degree and corporate job. Meanwhile, Logan and I were just Logan and I. I always joked that we were the spare parts of the family, but now, it didn't feel so funny. Later that night, I called Logan. I asked him if he knew about Caleb and Avery. He didn't. He didn't even sound angry when I told him. Just hollow. "Of course it was Caleb," he said quietly. "It's always Caleb." The fallout was immediate. Riley stopped talking to Caleb altogether. I tried to confront him again, but he brushed me off, acting like I was overreacting. My mom called me a few days later, her voice unnervingly calm. "Mason, we need to talk," she said. "About what?" I asked, still seething. "About Caleb and Avery," she replied. "We're having dinner at the house this weekend. I want you and Riley to come. It's time to move past this." I thought I'd misheard her. Move past this? He betrayed Logan. Avery broke his heart, and Caleb. I know it's hard. She cut me off gently. But Caleb's still your brother. He made a mistake, but he's happy now. Isn't that what matters? I was speechless. My mom, who was supposed to protect all of us equally, was siding with Caleb again. I told Riley about the dinner, and she rolled her eyes. Are you kidding me? She's trying to sweep this under the rug. Typical. I didn't disagree. Still, part of me felt like I had to go. Not for Caleb. Not for my mom. For Logan. I wanted him to know someone was still in his corner. That Saturday, I showed up at my parents' house, dreading what I'd find. Riley was already there, sitting on the porch with her arms crossed. This is going to be a disaster, she muttered as I walked up. I didn't argue. When we walked inside, Caleb was already at the dining table, grinning like he hadn't just torn the family apart. And Avery? She was there too, sitting next to him like she belonged. And our mom, Linda, stood at the head of the table, smiling as if nothing was wrong. Come sit, she said brightly. We're going to have a nice family dinner. I looked at Riley, and she looked at me. The air felt so thick with tension, I thought it might suffocate me. But I took my seat, and the disaster began. I didn't want to sit at that table. If I'm being honest, I wanted to flip the damn thing over and walk out, but Logan wasn't there, and Riley and I had to represent him. Someone had to call Caleb out. Someone had to say what everyone else was too cowardly to say. Linda, my mother, stood at the head of the dining table with a spread of food so immaculate it felt like she thought cooking could solve this mess. She was smiling, forcing cheer into the room like she could manifest it into existence. Let's just sit down, eat, and talk, Linda said. I looked at Riley, who muttered under her breath, I'd rather eat glass. Caleb was sitting at the far end of the table with Avery. Avery, it still made my blood boil to see them together. Caleb had one arm lazily draped over the back of her chair like they were on a damn date. Avery, though, wouldn't make eye contact with me or Riley. She kept her head down, poking at her plate, as if the mashed potatoes were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Where's Logan? I asked. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Linda gave me one of her tight-lipped, "You're ruining this" smiles. Logan decided not to come. Yeah, no kidding, Riley said, crossing her arms. Wonder why. Linda shot her a warning glare but didn't say anything. I think she knew Riley wouldn't back down. Out of all of us, Riley has always been the firecracker. She's only 2 years younger than me, but she's never been afraid to call things like she sees them, especially when it comes to Caleb. I turned my attention to Caleb, who was buttering a roll like he hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in our family. So, Caleb, I said, you're just okay with all of this? He looked up at me and gave me his infuriating, calm-down look. God, I hated that look. He's been giving it to me since we were kids, like he's somehow older, wiser, and above it all. What do you mean by this, Mason? This, I snapped, waving my hand at him and Avery. You stole Logan's fiancé, Caleb. The same Logan who trusted you enough to ask you to be his best man. Are you kidding me with this? Caleb sighed heavily and set his butter knife down, as if I was the unreasonable one here. Look, Mason, I know it's complicated, but Avery and I didn't plan this. Things just happened. Things just happened? Riley scoffed, leaning forward in her chair. That's your excuse? You don't accidentally fall into a relationship with your brother's fiancé, Caleb. Avery winced at Riley's words, but still didn't look up. I thought maybe she'd defend herself, say something, but she just sat there, letting Caleb do all the talking. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his frustration finally showing. I'm not going to sit here and let you two gang up on us. Avery and I have been honest with each other. We're happy together, and we don't need your approval. Honest? I shot back. You think what you did to Logan was honest? You didn't even have the guts to tell him yourself. He had to find out from Avery when she called off the wedding. That's enough. Linda's voice rang out across the table. She looked at me with that familiar disapproving glare, the one she used when I was a kid, and talked back. We are not going to spend this dinner yelling at each other like children. Then maybe Caleb shouldn't have acted like one, Riley snapped, pushing her plate away. Riley, please, Linda said, her voice tight. This isn't helping. Caleb and Avery are here because they want to move forward as a family. We all need to forgive and let this go. Forgive and let this go, I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. So, you're just okay with this? I asked slowly. You're okay with what Caleb did to Logan? Linda's face softened, as if she were speaking to a child who just didn't understand the world. Mason, life is complicated. People make mistakes, but they deserve a chance to be happy. Happy? Riley exploded, slamming her hands on the table. Mom, Logan is miserable. You're acting like none of this matters. Caleb humiliated him, and you're here playing hostess like it's Thanksgiving dinner. Caleb stood up then, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You know what? I don't need to sit here and be attacked in my own house. I'm done with this conversation. Sit down, I snapped. My voice came out low and dangerous, even surprising myself. I was so tired of Caleb walking away from everything. Responsibility, consequences, Logan, you don't get to waltz in here with Avery like nothing happened and then act like we're the problem. Avery finally spoke up then, her voice quiet and shaky. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Riley and I turned to her. Then why did it? I asked, my anger laced with disbelief. Avery looked at Caleb, almost as if she was waiting for permission to speak. When he didn't say anything, she took a deep breath. Caleb and we started talking months ago. At first, it was innocent. But he told me things about Logan. Things that made me doubt everything. What things? Riley demanded. Avery's voice faltered. He said Logan didn't really love me, that he was just going through the motions because he felt like he had to settle down. Caleb made me feel seen, like someone understood me. I froze, the pieces falling into place. Caleb had been planting seeds of doubt in Avery's mind for months. That was who he was. Charming, manipulative, always looking out for himself. You've got to be kidding me, Riley said, her voice dripping with disgust. You let Caleb convince you Logan didn't love you? Logan adored you, Avery. Everyone could see it. Avery flinched, but Caleb stepped in front of her, his voice cold. We're not going to sit here and let you two attack Avery. This conversation is over. Fine, I said, standing up. Then I guess I'll have this conversation with Logan instead. I'm sure he'll love hearing how his own brother was working behind the scenes to sabotage his relationship. Mason, Linda started, but I didn't let her finish. Logan deserves better than this, Mom. And if you can't see that, then I don't know what to tell you. I turned and walked out, Riley close on my heels. As soon as the front door slammed behind us, Riley let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Unbelievable, she muttered. Caleb's not even sorry. He believes his own lies. I didn't answer. My mind was spinning with what Avery had said. How Caleb had gotten into her head and twisted her feelings. This wasn't some accidental romance. Caleb had been orchestrating this for months, and Linda, for some reason, was choosing to ignore it. As we got into Riley's car, she turned to me. We have to tell Logan. I know, I said, but I don't think this ends here. And I was right. It didn't. The ride to Logan's apartment was quiet except for the hum of Riley's engine. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. We were both thinking the same thing. How the hell were we supposed to tell Logan about this? It was one thing for Avery to call off the wedding, but knowing Caleb had been manipulating her for months, that felt like a different beast entirely. When we got to Logan's place, I half expected him not to answer. He'd been a ghost since the breakup, shutting himself away from everyone except for the occasional text. But after a moment, the door cracked open, and Logan stared at us with dark circles under his eyes. He looked thinner, like he hadn't been eating. Hey, he said, his voice quiet. Didn't think I'd see you guys tonight. Can we come in? I asked. Logan hesitated for a beat, then stepped back to let us inside. The apartment looked just as tired as he did. Takeout containers were stacked on the coffee table. The blinds were drawn, and his couch looked like it doubled as his bed these days. Logan noticed me staring and gave a humorless chuckle. Yeah, I know. It's a mess. Take a seat. He gestured to the couch, brushing some papers off the cushions. Riley and I sat, but Logan stayed standing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He looked defensive, like he knew we hadn't come for a casual visit. What's up? He finally asked, his eyes flicking between us. Riley didn't wait. Logan, we need to tell you something about Caleb. The second she said Caleb's name, Logan tensed. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. I don't want to talk about him. You need to hear this, I said gently. It's about what really happened with Avery. Logan flinched at her name. For a second, I thought he was going to kick us out, but he let out a shaky breath and sat down in the armchair across from us. Fine. Say whatever you came here to say. I didn't sugarcoat it. Logan deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Avery told us tonight that Caleb had been talking to her for months. He told her things. Made her believe you didn't really love her. Logan's expression didn't change at first. He just stared at me, completely still. I wasn't even sure he'd heard me. But then, slowly, he looked away, and his fists clenched against his thighs. So Caleb convinced her to leave me, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Manipulated her, Riley corrected. He played with her head, Logan. She said she thought you were just settling for her because Caleb got in her ear. Logan laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. Of course he did. That's Caleb. He's always been good at taking things that don't belong to him. The anger in his voice surprised me. Logan has always been the calm one in our family. If I'm the middle child who's constantly stuck in the middle, and Riley is the firecracker, Logan is the quiet anchor. He doesn't get mad. He just gets sad. But now? Now he looked furious. He's done this before, Logan said suddenly, staring at the floor. What do you mean? Riley asked. Logan looked up, his expression dark. You really think this is the first time Caleb's gone after something that was mine? Remember when I tried out for the soccer team in high school? I frowned, trying to piece it together. Yeah, you didn't make the team. Logan smiled bitterly. No, I did. I made the team, but Caleb convinced the coach I was unreliable and that he'd be a better choice. I didn't find out until years later. Caleb made varsity and I got cut. Riley's eyes widened. What? Logan, why didn't you say anything? Because nobody would have believed me, he said with a shrug. It's always been Caleb. Caleb's the golden boy. Caleb can do no wrong. Hearing this, something clicked in my head. For years, Caleb had been the center of our mother's universe. He was charming, ambitious, and confident. Everything a perfect oldest son is supposed to be. But now, the cracks were showing. Caleb didn't just take things because he wanted them. He took things to win, to prove he was better than the rest of us. Logan, I said carefully, why do you think he did this? With Avery? Logan looked at me like I was stupid. Because he could. Caleb's always been jealous of me. It's subtle. He hides it well, but it's there. I think he saw how happy I was with Avery and decided he needed to take that away. Just like he's taken everything else. There was silence for a moment. Riley looked like she wanted to punch a wall, and I felt sick to my stomach. Logan was right. This wasn't just about Avery. This was about Caleb needing to prove, time and time again, that he was the best, no matter who he hurt in the process. Logan rubbed a hand over his face. You know what the worst part is? I loved her. I really, really loved her. And I trusted Caleb. I thought he was happy for me. I'm sorry, I said quietly. It felt so hollow, but I didn't know what else to say. Logan shook his head. I don't need you to be sorry. I need you to tell me what you're going to do about it. Riley frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Caleb isn't done, Logan said, his voice hard. You think he's just going to stop after this? He's already got Mom on his side. He'll keep twisting things until the rest of the family forgives him, and suddenly I'm the bad guy for not letting it go. That's what he does. Riley and I exchanged a look. I hated to admit it, but Logan was right. Our mother was already laying the groundwork for us to move past this. If we didn't do something, Caleb was going to come out on top, like always. We need to talk to Mom, Riley said. She has to see what's happening. She can't keep defending him. Logan snorted. Good luck with that. Mom will defend Caleb until the day she dies. You're wasting your time. I didn't want to believe that, but deep down, I knew Logan wasn't wrong. Linda had always made excuses for Caleb. Maybe it was because he was the firstborn. Maybe it was because he reminded her of herself. Whatever the reason, She'd been turning a blind eye to Caleb's behavior for years, and it had finally led to this. But as I sat there, watching my little brother sit in his wrecked apartment, I knew one thing for certain. Caleb wasn't getting away with this. Not this time. We're not letting him win, I said firmly. Not this time. Logan looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Because I'm done being Caleb's punching bag. As Riley and I left Logan's apartment that night, I felt something shift in me. I was done too. Done playing nice. Done letting Caleb walk all over everyone while Linda cheered him on. It was time to confront Caleb, and this time, I wasn't going to hold back. It didn't take long for Riley and me to decide what had to happen next. Caleb needed to be confronted, really confronted, and not just about Avery. This wasn't just about Logan anymore. This was about everything Caleb had been doing for years. The way he manipulated people, twisted situations, and made himself look like the perfect son while leaving the rest of us in the dirt. Logan was right. Caleb wasn't going to stop until someone made him, and we were going to make him. The next morning, Riley and I showed up at our parents' house unannounced. Linda opened the door, surprised to see us. She looked tired, like she'd been up all night worrying. Honestly? Good. She should be worrying. Mason. Riley, she said, forcing a smile. What are you doing here? We need to talk to Caleb, I said, brushing past her into the living room. Riley followed me, and Linda sighed heavily as she closed the door. This again, she said, her voice already tired. Can't you just… No, Mom. Riley cut her off, turning to glare at her. We can't. Caleb's here, right? Linda hesitated, then nodded. He's upstairs. But I don't know why you… Perfect, I said, heading for the staircase. Mason. Linda called after me. Don't start anything. I ignored her. At this point, I didn't care what Linda thought. She'd enabled Caleb long enough, and it was time for someone to do what she wouldn't. Riley and I marched up the stairs and down the hallway to Caleb's old bedroom. The door was half open, and we didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open, and there he was, sitting on his bed with his laptop open. When he looked up and saw us, his face twisted into a mix of annoyance and smugness. To what do I owe this honor? Caleb said, closing his laptop and leaning back against the wall. Here to lecture me some more? We're not here to lecture you, I said, crossing my arms. We're here for answers. Caleb rolled his eyes. I've already explained everything. Avery and I didn't plan this. Things just happened. Why can't you guys accept that and move on? Because it's a lie, Riley snapped. Avery told us you'd been getting into her head for months, Caleb. You were sabotaging her relationship with Logan the whole time. Caleb's face darkened, but he didn't lose that smug expression. So what? Relationships fall apart all the time. It's not my fault Logan couldn't keep her. I took a step toward him, my fists clenching at my sides. You think this is a game, don't you? You don't even feel bad about what you did. Why would I? Caleb shot back. Logan was never right for Avery. I did her a favor. You stole her. Riley yelled. You manipulated her into leaving Logan because you can't stand seeing anyone else happy. Caleb stood up, his expression shifting into something colder. Watch it, Riley. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, we know exactly what we're talking about, I said, my voice low. You've been doing this for years, Caleb. Undermining Logan, taking what's his, making yourself look like the golden child while the rest of us suffer for it. Caleb smirked. You're being dramatic. Am I? I shot back. Logan told us about the soccer team, about how you convinced the coach to cut him so you could take his spot. Sound familiar? Caleb's smirk faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. That was years ago. Who cares? Logan cares. Riley snapped. You ruined that for him, just like you ruined this. Caleb laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and mocking. You guys are unbelievable. You think I'm the villain? Logan's pathetic. He always has been. He's weak, and he lets people walk all over him. I didn't steal Avery. She chose me because I'm better than him. I felt my blood boiling, but Riley was faster. She took a step forward and jabbed a finger at Caleb's chest. You're not better than anyone, Caleb. You're a liar and a manipulator. And the only reason you get away with it is because Mom lets you. Leave Mom out of this, Caleb growled. Why? Riley shot back. You're her favorite, and we all know it. She'll defend you no matter what you do. At that moment, Linda appeared in the doorway. What's going on in here? She demanded, her voice sharp. Ask your perfect son, Riley said, turning to glare at her. He just admitted to manipulating Avery into leaving Logan. Linda's face paled, and she looked at Caleb. Is that true? Of course not, Caleb said smoothly, his voice softening. They're twisting my words, Mom. I never did that. Bullshit, Riley shouted. You said Avery chose you because you're better than Logan? Linda turned to Caleb, her expression unreadable. Caleb looked at her with wide, innocent eyes, like he always did when he needed to get out of trouble. Mom, come on. You know me. I'd never do something like that. Linda hesitated, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. For a second, I thought maybe, she'd finally see Caleb for who he really was. And then, as always, she folded. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice tight. We're not going to solve anything by yelling. Riley let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. You're still defending him. I'm not defending anyone. Linda shot back. But I'm not going to let this family fall apart over a relationship that didn't work out. This family already has fallen apart, I said quietly. And it's because of Caleb. Caleb shrugged, looking bored. Cry about it. I'm done with this conversation. No, Riley said sharply. We're done with you. What's that supposed to mean? Caleb asked, narrowing his eyes. It means we're not letting you win this time, I said. Logan's done. Riley's done. And so am I. You're on your own, Caleb. For the first time, Caleb looked genuinely rattled. You can't just cut me out of the family. Watch us, Riley said coldly. I turned to Linda, who looked stricken. Mom, you can pretend Caleb's perfect all you want, but the rest of us aren't playing along anymore. You're either with him, or you're with us. You decide. Linda looked at me like I'd slapped her. You can't ask me to choose. You've already chosen, Riley said quietly. You just don't realize it. Caleb said nothing as we left. For once, he didn't have a smug comeback or a lazy shrug. I think he realized in that moment that he'd pushed too far, that he'd finally lost control. As Riley and I walked out of the house, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Caleb might not face real consequences today, but he would eventually. People like Caleb always do. And for the first time, I wasn't going to be there to catch him when he fell. We didn't hear from Caleb or Linda for a few days after that confrontation. Honestly, I think they were both waiting for us to come crawling back like we always did. Especially Linda. That's how it had always gone in our family. Caleb messed up, Mom smoothed it over, and the rest of us had to bite our tongues for the sake of family unity. But not this time. Riley and I had made our choice, and when we told Logan about what happened at the house, he actually looked relieved. It's about time, he muttered, shaking his head. You have no idea how long I felt like I was screaming into a void. Over the next week, Linda tried to reach out to us, first through calls, then through texts. Every message was the same. Asterisk, we need to talk. This isn't how family acts. Asterisk. Asterisk, I know you're angry, but this has gone too far. Caleb is your brother. Asterisk. Asterisk, you don't understand the whole story. Come to dinner, and let's talk about this. Asterisk. We ignored her. For the first time, Riley, Logan, and I were on the same page, and it felt freeing. Caleb wasn't our responsibility anymore. If Linda wanted to cling to him, that was her choice, but we didn't have to play along. Unfortunately, Caleb wasn't done. It was a Thursday night when I got a call from an unknown number. I don't usually pick those up, but something told me to answer. Hello? Mason. It was Caleb. For a second, I didn't say anything. I'd half expected him to show up at my door, but hearing his voice still caught me off guard. He sounded off, not smug or arrogant, but desperate. What do you want? I asked, my voice flat. I need to talk to you, Caleb said quickly. It's important. Hard pass. Mason, please. His voice cracked, and it startled me. Caleb never asked for anything. He demanded it. Against my better judgment, I said, "Fine.
Talk.
Not over the phone. Meet me at the depot in an hour. Please." The depot was an old diner we used to go to as kids. It felt weirdly symbolic, like Caleb was trying to tap into some shared history to guilt me into listening. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. An hour later, I walked into the depot. Caleb was already there, sitting at a booth in the corner. He looked rough. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he had bags under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. For a second, I didn't recognize him. "What do you want, Caleb?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared down at the table, his fingers drumming nervously on the surface. "I messed up," he said finally, his voice low. I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, no kidding. No, Mason. I really messed up. More than you realize." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'd never seen Caleb like this. He looked scared. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Caleb took a deep breath, then let it out shakily. "I'm in trouble. Bad trouble." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw it in his eyes. Panic. "What kind of trouble?" Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his fingers trembling. "Debt. Debt?" He nodded. "I owe a lot of people a lot of money. I tried to fix it, Mason. I did. But it got out of control. Avery." He trailed off, his voice breaking. "Avery was part of the fix." "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach dropping. Caleb looked at me, and I swear I'd never seen him look so ashamed. "I needed money. I thought if I could get closer to Avery, I could, I don't know, convince her to help me out. Her family has money, and I thought maybe—" "You used her?" I interrupted, stunned. "You manipulated Avery because of your debt?" Caleb flinched, but he didn't deny it. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think she'd leave Logan for me. But once it started, I couldn't stop it." I stared at him, trying to process what he just said. Caleb hadn't just stolen Logan's fiancée because he wanted to win. He'd done it because he was desperate. He'd played with Avery's feelings, destroyed Logan's life, and torn our family apart, all to cover up the mess he'd made for himself. "Does Mom know?" I asked quietly. Caleb shook his head. "No, and she can't. If she finds out, she'll what? Finally see you for who you really are." I said bitterly. "Good. She deserves to know the truth. Mason, please." Caleb's voice was pleading now. "I'm asking you to help me. I don't have anyone else." "Help you?" I laughed in disbelief. "Are you serious? After everything you've done?" "You're my brother," Caleb said weakly. "Family's supposed to stick together. Don't you dare pull the family card." I shot back. "You don't get to hide behind that after what you did to Logan." Caleb looked at me like a drowning man begging for a life raft. "Please, I can't fix this without you." For the first time in my life, I felt nothing for Caleb. No anger, no resentment, just emptiness. He wasn't my brother anymore. He was just a man who'd burned every bridge he'd ever had. "You need help, Caleb," I said, standing up. "But it's not going to come from me." Caleb opened his mouth to argue, but I walked away before he could say another word. Riley, Logan, and I met at my apartment later that night. I told them everything Caleb had admitted, and for once, nobody was surprised. "He's always been like this," Logan said quietly. "It just took him this long to fall apart." "What about Mom?" Riley asked. "Do we tell her?" I thought about it for a long moment, then shook my head. "No, she's made her choice. If she wants to believe Caleb's perfect, let her. But we're done. With him, with her, with all of it." For the first time in years, I felt free. Caleb wasn't my responsibility anymore, and neither was Linda. I'd spent my whole life trying to hold this family together, but now I realized something. Sometimes, you have to let things fall apart. Logan looked at me and Riley, a faint smile on his face. "We're going to be okay, right?" "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "We're going to be okay." And for once, I believed it. My parents disowned me. I left home with around $1,000, but now my cousin says she deserves my fortune and has everyone convinced I'm obligated to support her, but Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. It was like my parents had a specific mold they expected me to fit, but no matter how hard I tried, I was always falling short. My older brothers, Sam and Luke, seemed to embody everything my parents valued: academic success, career-minded ambition, respect for tradition. Sam became a lawyer, and Luke went into medicine, and each of their achievements was celebrated like it was some grand family legacy. And then there was me, Daniel, the one who didn't follow the script. From a young age, I felt the weight of my parents' disappointment. They weren't overtly cruel or anything, but the way they looked at me, the helpful suggestions, the constant comparisons to Sam and Luke, it was suffocating. I had different ambitions. I was interested in tech, in building things, creating something unique, but that didn't exactly fit into their vision. To them, I was supposed to choose something respectable, something they could brag about at family gatherings. It was clear to me that I was never going to be enough for them. When I turned 18, I knew I couldn't stay. Leaving wasn't easy. In fact, it was probably the hardest decision I've ever made. But I couldn't keep living in a house where I felt like a failure every day. My parents barely put up a fight. My mom gave me a quiet hug. My dad gave a brisk nod, and that was it. I packed a few bags, took what little money I had saved, and left. No grand goodbye, no promises to keep in touch. I was on my own, and while it felt terrifying, it was also liberating. Starting fresh wasn't glamorous. I took the first job I could find, scraping by with barely enough to cover rent. But as hard as it was, I was free. I didn't have anyone breathing down my neck, didn't have to deal with their disappointment. Over time, things got better. I worked my way up in the tech industry, learned new skills, and eventually landed a stable position at a promising startup. I threw myself into my work, and after a few years, I started to see the fruits of my labor. Promotions came, and eventually, I made a bit of money on some smart investments. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me comfortable, something I never thought I'd have. Years passed, and I found myself with a life I was proud of. I didn't have a big family to lean on, but I had peace, and I had freedom. That was enough for me. I hadn't heard from my family in years, aside from a few obligatory holiday messages from my mom. I assumed they were living their lives, same as me, and I was content to leave it that way. But a few months ago, out of nowhere, I got a message from my cousin, Maddie. Growing up, Maddie and I had been close. She was a few years younger, always a bit of a troublemaker but fun to be around. We drifted apart after I left, partly because she stayed close with the family, adopting their views and criticisms. I hadn't thought much about her over the years, so seeing her name on my phone was surprising. Her message was simple, but immediately made me uncomfortable. She said she needed my help. Financial help, specifically. She told me that things had taken a bad turn for her, that she was desperate, and she didn't have anyone else to turn to. It sounded like a typical sob story, and part of me instantly doubted her. Why was she coming to me now, after all this time? And why was she acting like I owed her anything? She ended the message with, "Family sticks together, right?" That line bothered me. Where was that family loyalty when I was struggling to get on my feet? Where was it when I left home with nothing and didn't hear a peep from anyone for years? I wanted to ignore her, to shut down the request without a second thought. But that nagging feeling of guilt crept in. After all, she was family. And as much as I hated to admit it, a part of me still felt some responsibility to help. I decided to message her back, keeping things short and direct. I told her I'd consider helping, but only if she could explain what led to her situation. Her response came quickly, and she promised to call the next day to explain everything. I didn't really want to open up that door, but a conversation seemed harmless enough. I could hear her out, and if it didn't feel right, I could still say no. The next day, Maddie called, and I answered with mixed feelings. Her voice sounded shaky, and she immediately launched into a story about how she'd lost her job, how her rent was overdue, and how she felt like her world was crumbling. She told me she'd reached out to others in the family, but they couldn't, or wouldn't, help her. She emphasized how abandoned she felt, how she thought she could always count on family, and how she never thought she'd be in a position to ask for this kind of help. "Family is supposed to stick together, Dan," she said, her voice wavering. "I don't know who else to turn to." There was a dramatic pause after that, and I'll admit, I felt a pang of sympathy, but something still didn't sit right with me. Maddie was always good at spinning stories, and part of me wondered if she was exaggerating her situation. But hearing her sound so desperate, I started to question myself. Maybe I was being too cynical. After all, people fall on hard times, right? I agreed to help, but I made it clear I wasn't going to become her personal bank. I'd send enough to cover her rent for the next few months, but that was it. No further assistance unless there was a real emergency. She accepted, sounding genuinely grateful, and for a brief moment, I felt like I'd done the right thing. However, things didn't stay quiet for long. Within days of sending her the money, I started getting messages from other family members. People I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly reaching out to ask why I wasn't doing more for Maddie. It was like she'd flipped a switch, alerting everyone to the fact that I'd helped her, but apparently not enough. My brother Sam even sent a snide message, accusing me of being stingy with family. I felt blindsided. How had this spiraled so quickly? It was clear Maddie had told everyone I'd helped her, but somehow, she'd spun the story to make it sound like I was holding out, like I wasn't doing my family duty. Suddenly, I was the bad guy again, the one who wasn't stepping up, the one who wasn't loyal. The old resentment resurfaced, and I was torn. Part of me wanted to pull back completely, but the guilt was there, gnawing at me, just like it always had. I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake by helping her in the first place, by opening that door. And if so, I didn't know how to close it again without tearing open old wounds. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling things were about to get messy. When Maddie called again, her voice was more frantic than before, and I could feel the manipulation even as she pretended to just check in. She thanked me profusely for the money, then quickly shifted the conversation to how she'd had another financial emergency. Something about her car breaking down, and how she wouldn't be able to get to job interviews without it. It was a classic bait and switch, making it sound like she was just updating me on her struggles, only to turn it into a new request. I should have known better, but I found myself feeling bad for her all over again. After all, she was family. I reluctantly agreed to send a little more, but I reminded her again that I wasn't a constant source of support. This had to be a one-time thing. She promised that she understood, that she wouldn't bother me again, and thanked me in that sweet, overly sincere tone she always used when she got her way. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. My phone started lighting up with messages and calls from family members who hadn't bothered with me in years. First, it was my brother Sam, who, as usual, went straight to making me feel like I'd somehow let everyone down. He was blunt, calling me stingy, and saying that as the one making it big in tech, I should be doing more for the family. I tried to explain that I'd already helped Maddie twice, but Sam brushed it off, saying, "Family is forever, Dan. You don't get to pick and choose when you help." The irony of that statement hit me like a punch in the gut. Where was that family loyalty when I was struggling to get by, working multiple jobs just to afford a tiny apartment? No one had offered to help me then, and I didn't expect them to. But now that I'd built something of my own, they were acting like it was their right to claim a part of it. I didn't respond to Sam, just ended the conversation, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Then, my mother called. She rarely reached out, and it was usually for birthdays or holiday pleasantries, so I figured it was another half-hearted attempt at checking in. But as soon as I answered, I could tell this wasn't going to be a light-hearted call. "Daniel," she began, her voice stern. "I heard you've been helping Maddie, but only a little?" I felt my jaw clench. "Yes, Mom, I've helped her twice already, and she keeps coming back with more requests." "Well," she said, her tone cold, "you're doing well for yourself, aren't you? Surely you can manage a bit more for family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother, who hadn't shown any real interest in my life or my successes, was now acting as if my financial stability was somehow theirs to manage. I tried to tell her that I'd set clear boundaries with Maddie, that I'd done my part, but she cut me off, saying, "Family is a lifetime responsibility, Daniel. You don't get to walk away just because you're better off now." That was the kicker. Better off? In their eyes, maybe. But the years I'd spent struggling, working late nights, and scraping by just to get where I was now, none of that seemed to matter to them. They saw the end result and assumed I owed it to them somehow. as if they had been part of my journey all along. After that call, I started noticing a pattern. Every day, I'd get a message from a different family member, each one echoing the same sentiment. I was obligated to help Maddie, that I owed it to her and to the family. It was like they'd all coordinated this twisted intervention, trying to guilt me into submission. Maddie, meanwhile, kept reaching out with sob stories about her never-ending struggles and how grateful she was to have me in her life. The strangest part was that she seemed to be subtly increasing her demands with each message. At first, it was rent money, then car repairs. Then she hinted at her medical bills, mentioning health issues that she'd never talked about before. She even suggested that she might need help with legal fees after a supposed tenant dispute with her landlord. I could tell she was trying to reel me in, creating this web of endless problems so that I'd feel like I had no choice but to keep helping her. One night, after yet another message from her, I found myself sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone, feeling completely overwhelmed. I had tried to cut ties with this family, to move on and build a life where I wasn't constantly judged or weighed down by their expectations. Yet here I was, being dragged back into their orbit, guilt-tripped and manipulated as if I were still that confused, insecure kid they'd brushed aside. The worst part was that some small part of me still wanted their approval. As much as I hated to admit it, I still felt that old, familiar urge to please them, to be accepted. But every time I gave in, I could feel a piece of myself slipping away, like I was losing control of the life I'd fought so hard to create. Finally, I decided to confront Maddie. I told her that I was done with the constant requests, that I'd helped her as much as I could, and that she needed to find another way to manage her finances. Her reaction was immediate and harsh. She went from sweet and apologetic to cold and accusatory in a heartbeat. "So that's it," she spat, her tone dripping with disdain. "You're just going to cut me off? After everything I've been through?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Maddie, I've already sent you money twice. I'm not your personal bank." "Oh, so that's how it is," she sneered. "I thought we were family, Dan. I thought we looked out for each other. I guess I was wrong." Hearing her say that stung, and she knew it. She knew exactly what buttons to press, and she pressed them all. She went on, ranting about how I'd turned my back on family and how selfish I'd become now that I was doing well. She even suggested that I was somehow responsible for her current situation because I hadn't stayed in touch, as if my absence had caused her problems. The conversation left me drained, but it also clarified something. Maddie, and by extension, the rest of my family, didn't actually care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. They cared about the money, the support, the convenience of having someone they could lean on. Family was just a word to them, a means of controlling me and guilting me into submission. That night, I decided I was done with the games. I tried to be generous, to be the bigger person, but it was clear that nothing I did would ever be enough. I'd always be the outsider, the one who owed them for daring to find success on my own. They could keep their expectations, their guilt, and their misplaced sense of entitlement. I wasn't going to let them take away the life I'd built for myself. The next day, I blocked Maddie's number, along with several others who had hounded me in the days since she first reached out. I knew it would cause a backlash, that I'd probably get bombarded with angry messages and accusations, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was choosing my own well-being over their approval, and it felt like a huge weight had been lifted. In the days that followed, there was radio silence. I braced myself for the inevitable blow-up, the flood of messages from my family demanding to know why I'd cut Maddie off. But none came, and for a brief, blissful moment, I thought maybe they'd finally given up. But of course, it wasn't that simple. Maddie had only just begun to stir the pot, and it wouldn't be long before the rest of the family came after me with even greater force, armed with her twisted version of the truth. And as I'd soon find out, she wasn't going to stop until she turned everyone against me for good. It didn't take long for Maddie to retaliate. The messages from my family, which had briefly quieted down after I blocked her, started again with renewed intensity. This time, they were even more pointed, angrier, and shockingly misinformed. The first one came from my brother Luke, and as soon as I read it, my heart sank. "Daniel, how could you leave Maddie in the lurch like that?" he wrote. Mom and Dad are so disappointed in you. I didn't think you'd turn your back on family just because you're rich now. Rich? That word immediately set off alarm bells. I wasn't rich, by any stretch. I had a comfortable life, sure, but it wasn't like I was some millionaire living in a mansion. Where was he getting this idea? And the way he put rich in quotes made it seem like I'd somehow flaunted it or lorded it over the family, which was the exact opposite of what I'd done. The more I read his message, the angrier I got. It was clear Maddie had fed him some twisted version of events. She must have told him I was living lavishly while refusing to lift a finger to help her, painting me as the bad guy in a way only she could. I tried to respond rationally, explaining that I had already helped Maddie twice and that I wasn't in a position to be her endless financial safety net. But Luke didn't want to hear it. He shot back almost immediately, accusing me of letting success go to my head and reminding me that family is all we have. I could barely get a word in before he blocked me, clearly convinced by Maddie's version of the story. It wasn't just Luke. Within days, my entire family seemed to have heard about my so-called abandonment of Maddie. My phone blew up with messages from cousins, aunts, uncles, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly flooding my inbox with messages of disapproval and disappointment. My Aunt Nancy, who'd always been the type to gossip and stir the pot, went as far as to say, "Maddie's struggling, and all you care about is hoarding your precious money." It's disgusting, Daniel. Disgusting? The audacity was almost laughable. Here I was, someone who'd had to make it on his own, who had scraped by for years without a shred of support from any of them. And now that I'd found some stability, they had the nerve to imply I owed it all to them, that my success was somehow a shared asset. I was furious, but I also knew I needed to get to the bottom of what exactly Maddie had told them. So I decided to confront her directly. I unblocked her and sent a curt message, telling her we needed to talk. She responded almost immediately, agreeing to a call. Her tone seemed innocent, even cheerful, as if she had no idea why I'd be upset. When I finally called her, I skipped the pleasantries and went straight to the point. "Maddie, what exactly have you been telling everyone about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with an answer. "I haven't been telling anyone anything, Dan. I just mentioned that I was struggling, and you weren't as supportive as I hoped. That's all." "Not as supportive as you hoped?" I repeated, incredulous. "Maddie, I sent you money twice, and I made it clear that I couldn't keep doing it. But somehow, everyone thinks I'm rich and abandoning you. Where did that come from?" She sighed, a theatrical sound that grated on my nerves. "I mean, you are doing pretty well, aren't you? I don't see why it's a big deal for you to help family a little more. It's not like you can't afford it." I felt my patience slipping. "Maddie, that's not the point. The point is you're spreading lies, making it sound like I'm hoarding money while you're on the verge of homelessness. And now everyone in the family is turning against me because of it." She didn't even flinch. Instead, her tone turned cold, her words cutting. "Well, maybe you should think about why everyone believes me, Dan. Maybe it's because you've always been the one who turns his back on us. It's not like you've been a real part of this family anyway." I was stunned. She twisted the situation so skillfully, framing herself as the victim and me as the ungrateful outsider. And deep down, she knew exactly what buttons to push, the old insecurities she could exploit. It was like she had no remorse for the chaos she'd caused, no hesitation about lying to everyone to get what she wanted. "Listen, Maddie," I said, my voice barely concealing my anger. "This is going to stop. I've done enough. I'm not sending you another cent, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about what you've been doing." That got a reaction. Maddie's tone shifted, a mix of anger and panic. "Oh, so now you're going to play the victim? You think anyone's going to take your side over mine? I'm the one who's been struggling, who's been there for the family. You're just the one who walked away and never looked back." The sheer nerve of her words left me speechless. After everything, she still saw herself as the victim, still believed she had every right to demand my support without giving anything in return. I ended the call, knowing I'd get nowhere with her. But it wasn't just Maddie. Somehow, she'd managed to twist the entire family into thinking I was the selfish one, that I owed them something just because I'd found success on my own. I wasn't sure how to fix this or if it could even be fixed. In the days that followed, I tried to reach out to a few family members, explaining my side, detailing what I'd done for Maddie and the boundaries I'd set. But every call, every message, was met with suspicion or outright hostility. My mom accused me of making excuses and trying to look like the good guy, while my dad told me that I should have expected this after the way I abandoned the family. It was like trying to fight a wildfire with a garden hose. No matter what I said, Maddie's narrative had already taken root, and my attempts to set the record straight only seemed to make them more determined to see me as the villain. In one final attempt to salvage some truth, I messaged Sam. I figured if anyone might listen, it would be him. He'd always been the reasonable one growing up, the peacemaker in family arguments. I told him everything. How I'd helped Maddie, the boundaries I'd set, and how she'd turned everyone against me. I poured my heart into that message, hoping he'd see the situation for what it was. But his response shattered that last bit of hope. He wrote back a few hours later, saying, "Dan, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the brother I remember. Maybe you should take a step back and look at yourself. We're family. It's not about boundaries. It's about being there when it counts." That was it. I was officially the family outcast, painted as the selfish, ungrateful brother who'd forgotten where he came from. I couldn't fight it anymore. They'd made their decision, and no amount of truth would change their minds. A few days later, I deleted all their numbers from my phone. The constant pressure, the guilt tripping, the manipulation. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to be their scapegoat, the one they guilt and shamed whenever it suited them. If they wanted to believe Maddie's lies, then so be it. I was done trying to win their approval or justify my choices. It was painful, letting go of that last shred of family connection. As messed up as things were, they were still my family, and part of me had always hoped we'd find a way to reconnect. But this whole ordeal had shown me just how deeply entrenched their expectations were, and how little they actually cared about my happiness or well-being. So, I let them go. I let go of the need for their acceptance, their approval. It hurt more than I thought it would, but it was also freeing. For the first time, I felt like I could live my life without looking over my shoulder, without worrying about their opinions. Maddie had won, in a way. She turned them all against me, and they'd bought into her story without a second thought. But in the end, I realized it didn't matter. I didn't need their validation or their love if it came with strings attached, if it only existed as long as I was useful to them. It was over. I'd lost my family, but in a strange way, I'd also found something I'd been missing all along: freedom. After cutting ties, I thought that would be the end of it. I braced myself for the empty space, the absence of family, and told myself that I'd move forward. But a part of me still wanted answers. The way Maddie had spun her lies, the way everyone believed her without a second thought, it gnawed at me. So I decided to dig deeper. If I was going to walk away, I wanted to know the truth, once and for all. I started by doing some casual online sleuthing. I looked up Maddie's social media profiles, scrolling through her posts and piecing together bits of her life she hadn't told me about. It didn't take long to realize that her story didn't add up. For someone on the verge of losing everything, she was doing surprisingly well. Her feed was full of smiling photos from beach vacations, weekends at trendy restaurants, and shopping sprees that didn't exactly scream financial hardship. And then there was the kicker: a photo of her car, newly repaired, with a caption about finally getting things fixed. The same car she claimed was too broken down for her to get to work, for which she'd begged me for money. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. It was clear that Maddie had lied, spinning an elaborate tale of hardship to squeeze money out of me. I wanted to confront her with what I'd found, but I knew better than to think she'd feel any remorse. So I took a different approach. I reached out to a few family members, not to plead my case, but to share what I discovered. I sent them screenshots of her vacation photos, her shopping trips, the evidence of her lies. At first, there was radio silence. Then, predictably, the backlash started. Instead of admitting they'd been wrong, several family members doubled down, accusing me of invading Maddie's privacy and going out of my way to make her look bad. My own mother messaged me, saying, "Daniel, I don't know why you're doing this. Maddie's going through a rough time, and instead of helping her, you're stalking her online to prove some point. Stalking her? I couldn't believe it. Here I was, just trying to show them the truth, and they were acting like I was the villain. Maddie must have realized she was backed into a corner, because she called me the next day, her tone icy and accusatory. Really, Daniel? She snapped as soon as I answered. You're so desperate to make me look bad that you're digging into my life, spying on me? What's wrong with you? I laughed, unable to contain my disbelief. Spying on you? Maddie, you posted all of it publicly. I'm just showing everyone what you didn't tell them, that you're not exactly struggling the way you made it sound. She scoffed. Oh, please. You know nothing about my life. Maybe I deserve those vacations, after everything I've been through. Or is it such a crime to want a little happiness? The entitlement in her voice was staggering. She genuinely believed she was in the right, that she had every reason to manipulate me and anyone else who'd fall for her story. And worse, she saw my success as something that belonged, in part, to her. Look, Maddie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't care about your vacations. What I care about is the fact that you lied to me and the whole family. You turned everyone against me because I wouldn't keep funding your lifestyle. Don't you see how messed up that is? She paused, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd show a shred of remorse. But instead, she laughed, a short, bitter sound that sent a chill through me. Look at you, playing the victim, she sneered. You wouldn't be where you are without this family. Don't pretend you did all this on your own, Daniel. The least you could do is share a little with the people who were there for you. The audacity of her words hit me like a punch. Maddie genuinely believed that my success was a family achievement, that I was somehow indebted to all of them. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her how hard I'd worked, how I'd sacrificed to get to where I was. But I knew it would fall on deaf ears. What support, Maddie? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What support did you or anyone else in this family ever give me? I left home with nothing, and no one offered to help me. So tell me, where exactly does this family debt come from? She didn't have an answer. Instead, she muttered something about doing what she had to and hung up. The conversation left me feeling more drained than ever, but it also gave me a strange sense of clarity. I'd always known Maddie was manipulative, but hearing her outright say that she felt entitled to my success, like it was some shared inheritance, was a wake-up call. The final straw came when my dad called me a few days later. I picked up, hoping for once he'd actually hear me out. But he went straight into lecturing me, repeating the same tired lines about family duty and putting the family first. Dad, I interrupted. Have you even listened to what I've told you? Maddie lied to all of us. She's not struggling. She's living it up and using me to fund it. Can't you see that? He sighed, as if I were the one exhausting him. Daniel, families go through rough patches. You don't just abandon them because someone made a mistake. Maddie is going through something, and you're making it worse by digging up her personal life and holding it against her. His words confirmed what I'd feared all along. No matter what Maddie did, no matter how blatantly she lied or manipulated, they would always side with her. They saw her as one of them, someone worth standing up for. I, on the other hand, was still the outsider, the one who'd left and was therefore less of a family member. Fine, I said, finally feeling the last thread of my patience snap. If that's how you all feel, then I won't bother you with my rich, selfish life anymore. Consider this my final family duty. I'm done. Don't contact me, and don't expect anything from me again. He tried to respond, but I hung up before he could get another word in. I knew it was harsh, but I was done bending over backward to meet their twisted expectations. For years, I'd put up with the silent judgment, the disappointment, the nagging guilt. But this was it. I was severing the cord once and for all. After the call, I sat alone in my apartment, letting the silence settle around me. It felt strange, almost surreal. I'd always thought family was supposed to be a source of support, people who loved you unconditionally. But my family had shown me, time and again, that their love was conditional, contingent on me being the son they wanted, the brother they approved of, the cousin who'd give without question. In the days that followed, I felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't quite loneliness, but more a lingering sadness, a sense of loss for something I'd never really had. I had friends, a fulfilling job, a life that I'd built on my own, but family, real family, had always been just out of reach. Eventually, the sadness turned into something else, relief. I no longer had to worry about their approval or their guilt trips. I didn't have to bend over backward to prove I was a good son, a good brother, or a good cousin. I was finally free to live my life without looking back. As the weeks passed, I found myself thinking about them less and less. They hadn't reached out again, which confirmed that they truly bought into Maddie's narrative. They'd chosen their side, and I'd chosen mine. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but it was a new beginning. A clean slate where I could finally live on my own terms. I wouldn't lie and say it didn't hurt. Family is supposed to mean something, to be a source of love and support. But I'd learned the hard way that family can also be a source of pain, manipulation, and endless obligation. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I deserved better than to be their scapegoat, their backup plan. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I was alone, yes, but I was also free. And as I looked forward to the future, I knew that I'd finally made peace with my past. No more guilt, no more family drama. Just me, my life, and the people who truly cared about me, on my terms. In the weeks after severing ties, I found myself in a strange place emotionally. I hadn't expected it to feel this final. There was a lingering ache, a subtle emptiness, but also a profound relief. I no longer had to field accusations or guilt-laden messages, no longer had to navigate their endless demands. For the first time, I was truly alone, and it felt freeing. I'd always believed that, no matter what, family would come around. Even after years of neglect and judgment, I held out some hope that one day they'd accept me for who I was. But Maddie's betrayal, and their quickness to believe her lies, had shattered that last illusion. I finally saw that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. And honestly, that realization was liberating. I focused on my work, poured my energy into my career and the friendships I'd cultivated over the years. These were people who respected me for who I was, not for what I could give them. They didn't care about my bank account or expect me to solve their problems. They were friends who valued me as a person, and being around them reminded me that I could build my own family, one that didn't come with strings attached. Then, one quiet Sunday, a letter arrived from my mother. It was a strange sensation, seeing her handwriting on the envelope. I hesitated, almost dreading what she might have to say, but curiosity won out. The letter was short, direct, and painfully familiar in tone. She wrote that she was disappointed in my decision to abandon the family, that she couldn't understand why I'd cut them off so harshly. She made no mention of Maddie's lies or the fact that I tried to explain my side. Instead, she repeated the same refrain. Family comes first, no matter what. And then, near the end, she added a line that would have once crushed me. Asterisk, I hope you come to your senses before it's too late. Asterisk. I read those words over and over, feeling the sting of their finality. But for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to fix things, to reach out and explain myself again. The weight of their expectations, the unending need to prove myself, had finally lifted. I knew that, no matter what I did, I'd always be the outsider in their eyes. And that was okay. I folded the letter and tucked it away. It was a relic of a part of my life that I was ready to leave behind. I didn't need their acceptance or validation anymore. I had my own life, my own accomplishments, and people who genuinely cared about me. Letting go of my family had been painful, but it was also the healthiest decision I'd ever made. In the end, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, understanding, and mutual support. I hadn't found that with them, but I knew I could find it elsewhere. I wasn't defined by their approval, and I wasn't going to live my life trying to meet their impossible expectations. As I looked toward the future, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I was finally free to be myself, without the weight of their judgments or demands. And that, I knew, was worth every ounce of heartache I'd endured to get here.